Welcome to the Entre Pastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the Entre Pastors podcast on YouTube. Hey, my name is John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of Entre Pastors, and in this episode, you're going to hear some content that's a little bit different from the normal content that we put out here at Entre Pastors. We're titling this The Joseph Project because our guest, John Hanson, that's what he's calling this thing that he's working on right now. And I don't want to take too much of his thunder. I'm going to let him share it. But basically, John believes that just like Joseph of old in the book of Genesis, where God had given him a message about what was coming in the future, 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine, John believes that he has a similar message for the church right now, based on some economic forecasting that is widely available out there and some other factors. John believes that there is some severe times coming financially, and there is a season right now where God's people can be preparing to be in a position to not only stay in a place of keeping themselves healthy and safe and others, but also thriving financially in a season where a lot of people are not thriving financially. He sees an opportunity coming for God's people to really surge forward and reclaim some things for the kingdom of God. And so really interesting conversation coming your way. One other thing I'll share with you about this, the time that I interviewed John for this, I was actually interviewing him for another podcast. And rather than setting up everything and recording the same conversation for this podcast, I just said, you know what, John, I'm going to share that same interview that we did for the 95 podcast for the 95 network. We'll just share the same interview with the Entre Pastors audience. So if you're a little bit confused as to why I'm introducing John to that audience, that's why. But guys, you're in for an interesting conversation. We hope that it challenges you, inspires you, makes you think a little bit, and once again points to the value for pastors to be launching businesses right now and creating some alternative streams of revenue, maybe in preparation for some things that might be coming down the pipe. So get ready for an interesting conversation. Here we go. Check out what John Hanson has to say about the Joseph Project. Let's do it. Well, John, it is my pleasure to get to serve as a guest host once again on the 95 podcast, filling in for Dale Sellers. And it's my honor to welcome you to the show, man. Welcome.
Thank you. I greatly enjoyed our conversation, John. I was looking forward to this, to really encourage and bring some awareness on some things that we both agree are super important, especially for entrepreneurial pastors and church leaders.
Yeah. So you and I connected in the recent weeks, and as we were having a conversation, I just thought I want to introduce you to more pastors because I think you have a message that is of urgent importance for the church right now. And I don't think you're crazy, so I'm just going to come right out on the front side and go, I don't think this is crazy talk. I think this is, there's probably some significance in what you have to share, and I think it's going to create some interesting conversation and thought process in the pastors that are listening to this. So let's start here, John. Why don't you give just an introduction, kind of your 30,000-foot overview of your resume with our audience, and then we'll get into kind of what is on your heart, this urgent message for the church in this hour.
Sure, and I'll try to nutshell this as best I can, because if you hit my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that there's quite a variety in my career. So it started back in Christian camping, back when I was 16 years old. That's what was my first experience kind of outside of home, and that led to opportunities within Christian camping and Christian ministry and leadership, different places, different states. And it led to, in Northern Kentucky for 8 years, leadership, just kind of progressive leadership opportunities within the Southern Baptist circles, where I started as minister of music, then became deacon and treasurer, smaller churches, and then was ordained by the church that I started with, and had my own congregation, rural congregation, for 2 years before coming back up to Columbus, Ohio for more Christian camping opportunities. And at that point in 2005 is where it shifted away from a ministry to workplace, to what I'll say is a professional career. And that ran a whole gamut of industries, professional sales, B2B sales, automotive, truck driving, believe it or not, for a year, But then in 18 is where I published my first book on customer service, and that enabled me to publish it through Amazon. So copies were sold worldwide, and that gave me access to stages in person and virtual across the US and some overseas, all virtual, and released my second book in November, and discovered my life purpose through a cool believer, 87 years old. And she helps me identify that my life purpose is to encourage others, May of 2019.
Hmm.
And that was the God-given inspiration of understanding. That's why I do what I do: public speaking, business coaching, sales, one-on-one discussions, small group, workshop facilitations, writing books, whatever it manifests itself. My life purpose is to encourage others, to fill others with courage. And then in 22 is where the Lord connected dots for me through experiences I had in 2011 and in 2016, and in 22 is where he showed me, revealed to me things that I've shared with a handful of people. But what I discovered, John, was that entrepreneurial people tend to get it, tend to understand it, or at least look into it. Where those that aren't entrepreneurial, it's can be overwhelming or too much, and they don't, and they just kind of continue on with how things are. And so that's why I really enjoyed our conversation, because, and I believe firmly what you're doing, because I was a bivocational pastor for most of those 2 years. I understand completely the value of not being 24/7 solely supported by a church. I know we'll get into that in a little bit, but I believe in your mission.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just to fill in the listening audience, it's possible not everybody that's listening to this knows who I am and the work that I'm doing. So just a quick aside, and that is one of the platforms that I oversee and am a co-founder of is called Entre Pastors, where we took the word entrepreneur and pastor and shoved those two words together to make a new word that I hope is in the dictionary someday before I die. But yeah, we help pastors launch businesses out in the marketplace as a way to not be, financially dependent upon the church, and to do a little bit better financially than what traditionally has been the case for most pastors in, vocational ministry settings. But here's the thing: I want to just jump in, and I don't want pastors to shut this off going, oh, they're talking about business and entrepreneurial stuff. I'm not an entrepreneur. Hey, pastor, hold on just a minute before you shut this off. I believe that John has a message for the church that whether you consider yourself to be entrepreneurial or not, like, you are in a place of leadership. And leaders, John, I believe that good leaders are always asking at least two questions and answering two questions. Where are we right now, and where are we going? And you've got some thoughts on some things that may be coming down the pipe. And as pastors and leaders over congregations and over real people, like, we ought to be like looking into some of these things going, is there something coming our way that we have time to be prepared for and to help get God's people ready for, which could end up being the finest hour of the church, which I still believe is out in front of us. So having set the stage with that, what's on your heart, man? Let's get into this and have a conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you. Great questions that leaders should be asking that are forward thinking. Yeah, I grew up on Christian radio, so we had a television in the house, but we lived in such a rural part of Western New York that we really didn't get any channels. So the bulk of what I listened to was Christian radio. And I remember Larry Burkett years ago when I was young saying that he wrote a book called The Coming Economic Earthquake, and established Crown Financial and other things that was really addressing common sense, biblically grounded financial principles that are timeless. Well, back then they were saying, well, you can't keep kicking the can down the road debt wise. It's just not sustainable. Well, somehow as a country, we figured out how to do that. We're still kicking the can down the road. Common sense tells us you just can't keep doing that. It's like Winston Churchill said, trying to borrow your way out of debt is like standing in the bucket and trying to pick it up by the handle. It just doesn't work long term. It's not a solution. So the common sense plays a factor that way. I think scripture makes sense of the borrower is servant to the lender. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, if you're entrepreneurial and business minded and see the value of leveraging debt in order to grow a business, but personally, especially, debt is one of those things that often holds people back. That if you're obligated to somebody, you don't fully own whatever it is that obligation is attached to. So there's a scriptural principle that makes sense in this as well. But there's also a historical pattern that I noticed of, if you go back, history, those that don't learn from it are doomed to repeat it.
Yep.
And I know it's a well-worn adage, but it's true. History is there for us to learn from. Plus, we see that in scripture, that there's cycles. It's done so that we can pick up and perceive things that are likely to happen. So there's history behind this, but most importantly, there was something I discovered back in 2016 that I encountered that came with a 94.7% accuracy. So what I'm going to share with you is by apolitical experts that have been into this space since 1948, and their track record is 94.7% accurate when they're forecasting something. That gave me a tremendous amount of confidence, but the dots didn't connect spiritually until just last year. And what he showed to me was the passage in Genesis 41. And in Genesis 41, Joseph is called in to interpret a dream, two identical dreams for Pharaoh. 7 years of the lean cows and the fat cows, and the lean ears of corn and the fat ears of corn. And the translation, the interpretation given to Joseph was that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And the famine's going to be so severe that the people won't remember the 7 years of plenty. So Joseph's recommendation was to prepare for that. Well, 41 is the story and the explanation, and Pharaoh taking his word and putting Joseph second in command of all things in Egypt. But chapter 47 is the cautionary tale. Now, why am I saying all this? So let me go back to that group, and the website you should hit is ITR Economics. They have a website and they have a tab on there devoted to this. So here's what they're calling for. Now, this is the group that has the 94.7% accuracy rate that's been forecasting since the late 40s, and they've been pretty accurate. They're calling for a global depression in the 2030s. And this isn't a secret. There's a tab on their website devoted to it. Other thought leaders have been talking about it, and it just makes sense. In common sense, in history, there's almost a perfect 100-year pattern for that. If you go back to 1919, the 1920s, October of 1929, leading into the decade of the 2030s, we're almost set up for a perfect repeat pattern of that with COVID, the 2020s, and I believe October 29, and then the 2030s. So this group is calling for a global depression starting around 2030, lasting about 10 years, a 6-year trough, and about 4 years to climb out of that. They're calling for about up to 25% unemployment globally. But some of the things that they didn't talk on that were of a concern to me were the immediate consequences, and then the ones that would kind of come along after those immediate consequences. So when we flash back to the 1930s, it was catastrophic. But now we are so interlinked globally that the impact is significantly more if we encountered something like that. You just get to a point where you can't print your way out of it. And so it has to correct itself. And that's how it does it. But here's the challenge of that. So what was shown to me is that this was in 22. I was shown that there's a 7 year of plenty. Now, there's some parts of the country where you're not experiencing that, where it does feel like a recession. But I live in central Ohio, and it's gangbusters here. And there's other parts of the country Texas, Florida, Western Tennessee, Charlotte. There's places all across the United States and other parts of the world that are just thriving in spite of costs and everything being higher. So I believe there's going to be a time of unprecedented plenty, and depending on what happens politically that can help affect things in business, we could see a tremendous shift in the next few years. But even if we don't, I remember a salesperson, he said his father, who worked in sales for decades, said, here's your litmus test if it's a true recession. He said the restaurant parking lots are empty during a recession. And I'm telling you, where I live, the parking lots are packed, even not on a Friday night. Monday through Thursday night, the parking lots are packed. So I don't feel that it's a true recession. Costs are higher, yes. But here's the concern that I have. Just like what happened in 1930, as we look at it in 2030, if you have something that significant happen, just like happened in 1930, the value of anything dramatically plummets overnight. And that's anything you've got in investments, that's the value of your home. And there's a lot of other things that call into question too. So why I'm calling this the Joseph Project, that came to my mind of the best way to describe it without really describing it, is the Joseph Project is linking Genesis 41 and Genesis 47 and putting that in as a cautionary forewarning of what I, and most importantly, experts that know what they're talking about are saying of what is coming, now we're looking at less than 7 years. We're looking at 6 years or a little less than. If history repeats itself, October of 2029 is less than 7 years away, less than 6 years away now. So there's not much time. The concern there is, as a pastor, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, the people in your flock, your church, and you and your family, if you're fully supported, and even if you're not, has a significant impact on that and a whole bunch of areas too. So I called it the Joseph Project, and then I listed 12 broad categories. I called it the 12 tribes of 12 areas to be looking at or considering in connection with this. Again, if
Can
you
I
hit
jump in
my
and just pause
yeah,
you
yeah,
real quick? We'll dive into these 12 areas.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that thought. Let me just do a quick little reset or kind of let some people catch up, because there's probably some minds that are spinning right now. Because if people are listening, what they just heard you say is that there's a economic forecasting group that's been around since the 40s. They have a 94.7% accuracy rate. They're apolitical. This is not a, driven by Republicans or Democrats, or there's not really an agenda. It's just data. This is what
yeah,
we're looking at and projecting. And they're saying, some really smart people are saying that in the year 2030 or somewhere thereabouts, they're forecasting a global depression. Now, here's why I said early in the episode, I don't think you're crazy, because I listen to a lot of different podcasts, with business and economics and things like that. And one of the guys that has been a mentor of sorts in my life over the years is a guy by the name of Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And,
yes,
for years, he and many experts that he brings onto his podcast have been saying the same thing. You can't keep doing what our governments and, central banking system has been doing. You can't just keep,
right,
kicking the can down the road. Eventually, those chickens will come home to roost. And so I have a quick question for you, because there might be some yeah buts, and then we're going to get into the hope and, like, what do we do with this and how do we
yes,
prepare for this?
yes,
But here would be a yeah but. There's probably someone right now listening to this going, guys, there's always the next doomsday message out there. We had the Y2K. Fun fact: I was in the bottled water business back in the late '90s. So when Y2K was cranking up, people were buying those 5-gallon bottles of water by the
oh gosh,
by the gallons, right? And we were
yeah,
stocking everyone up with water because everything was going to just go to hell in a handbasket, and it
right.
didn't. And there's been all kinds of doomsday predictions for all kinds of different things. What makes this any different? This is just going to be another storm we ride out, and we'll print some more money and, keep getting out of it like we've always done. Like, what would you say to that argument? Because it's out there. Someone's going to say that.
Sure. Yeah, I liken it to this when I shared this with a few people. As I said, if I told you that whether you gamble or not, we could pack a plane and I could take you to Vegas and you could win, and I could give you 94.7% odds. The four responses would be, that's ridiculous. Don't even consider it. Secondly, maybe I'll look into it, but I'll decide on it later. Third one is you look into it and you say, that makes sense. I'll dip my toe in the water. And then there's others that just say, they take a look at it. The person knows what they're talking about. They've got a track record, mortgage the house, let's go. So there's going to be four responses. Any new idea, it's the Rogers bell curve of adopting new ideas. You're always going to have your early adopters, which are single percent. You have your early majority, it's about a third. Then you're going to have your late majority after it's become a well-known or commonly accepted idea. Then you have your laggards that never will accept a new idea and will move when it's too late. So I expect there'll be a range of responses. My response to the ones that are highly skeptical is, I would say, if this was just my opinion, then you'd have every right to just blow it off. But because I'm presenting to you common sense, I would appeal to that first. Of course, you can't just keep borrowing indefinitely and not have to pay it back. They see the debt clock. Like, there's enough evidence around that common sense applies here. Scripturally, we know that it's best not to be in debt to someone. History tells us that it's really good not to be in debt to someone, that these economic cycles happen, and they don't just happen once in a while. These economic cycles are a regular thing, these market corrections, significant ones. And then I would point to the expertise, the fact that they're apolitical. This group, ITR Economics, if they were looking to profit from it, They would keep it secret. They would require a membership or access, but because they make it, you can Google it and find it. The fact that it's that plus their track record, that's why I combine all of those things. And then I would say, if you're a person of faith and you pray about this and you put all these things in front of the Lord and you say, is this more likely to happen or not? I believe he'd clearly indicate to you, like he did to me, that it would be better to take action on this, because let's play what they call devil's advocate, which is a horrible thing in
Yeah, he
believer
doesn't need
circles.
one, but go ahead anyway.
No. But let's split the other side. Let's say, they're wrong about this, and you do all this work. What have you gained anyways? But let's say they're right about it and you're wrong about it and you don't take action. What have you lost? I think the consequences of not taking action on something that has multiple weights to it is far more catastrophic than maybe what you would consider to be upheaving the apple cart for a period of years and then nothing happens. Y2K also did not have all of these factors that I shared. That was kind of an anomaly, and people's absolutely profited from it. I remember that in 2000. So I would say those factors.
That's a good answer. I mean, you did a good job at like taking that on, and so that I like that. It's like, what, if I'm wrong, you're not really losing anything if you take these action steps, and if I'm right and you do nothing, like there's going to be significant ramifications. So here's another response then that people might have, and then we'll move into some of your action steps as we say, well, how do we prepare? Some people hear these types of things and it's like, I'm instantly overwhelmed. I want to put my head in the sand. It's the sky is falling, and it's easier just not to look at this than to address it. So give us some hope in all of this. Like, what are you recommending if you really sense that you heard from God saying, look, you've got a set period of a time for feasting essentially and building and growing, and then there's going to come a crash. What should people be thinking about, and what would a pastor need to be thinking about in terms of not only preparing themselves but the people that they're leading for such a time as this?
One of my favorite verses, kind of a life verse, is that one in Timothy that says, for the Lord has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And that's where people in leadership have the opportunity to bring those things to bear. The power of God, love for the people they serve, and a sound mind. If you have those things, you pray for those things, and you ask for those things, he provides them. So I see this really, John, why I'm actually more excited about this. And I know that could sound a little strange. So let me explain what I mean. Being entrepreneurial since I was a kid, it's hardwired into me. So I was an entrepreneurial pastor. Entrepreneurial, I see things like this as once in a lifetime opportunities. Well, because usually when things like this happen, the only ones who really benefit are the uber wealthy, where, okay, they take a hit, but now they can acquire all kinds of things for pennies on the dollar. If you go back historically to the 1930s, the ones who made out like bandits were the ones that had so much wealth that even with the collapse of things, they didn't lose everything. Then they were able to acquire things because people had no choice. What I see this as a once in a lifetime opportunity is a time for the kingdom-minded businesses, kingdom-minded congregations to take back ground from things that secular companies have, that companies that clearly have agendas that go against scripture have. I see this as an opportunity, massive opportunity. And yeah, 5 to 6 years isn't very long. But on the other hand, I was in Iraq and I watched the tsunami that hit Japan. I watched it unfold live on network television, news network television at the operations center I was in Iraq. I watched it from helicopter view, and I just saw it coming. Well, if you could be told years in advance, the plates are going to shift on this year, and then here comes the wave. It was in 2010, I believe, that I was in Iraq. No, it was 2011. It was 2011 that it happened in the spring of 11, I think. Well, if you could have been told those shifts were going to happen in those plates, and then that was going to happen, and then you wouldn't be what I saw in the news, where cars and buildings and other things are just getting swept away by this unstoppable tide. That's what I equate this to. It's a tsunami that I know with great confidence is likely to come. And I even have a time window of when it's likely to come. If I can have that kind of information, then not only would I be prepared not to be destroyed by it, More importantly, I'd be prepared to actually benefit from it. So entrepreneurial people, when they see challenges, whether it's recessions or demands in the marketplace or shifts that the way we used to do business doesn't work anymore, they see those as windows of opportunity. And I see this as a God-given window of opportunity to take back ground for the kingdom of sectors in the economy that are ruled or controlled by government or by secular organizations. I see this as a potential for an alternate economy done right, where the resources are pooled by believers so that we have options, rather than, okay, when anytime there's a significant market correction, I'll go back to 1930, it's always at the expense of personal liberty, even though it's disguised as relief, even though it's disguised as Ronald Reagan, right? The most fearsome words you can hear are, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's that idea of, as believers, we know that our greatest hope comes from our Heavenly Father, but then also people who believe the same. And there are quite a few of those across the United States and around the world. And that's where the ones who are entrepreneurial and forward thinking, and they hear this, rather than seeing it as like the world's coming to an end, they see it as, we prepare for this. And this can be life-changing impact for the ones who do something about it. And then I'm looking forward to what's going to be gained for the kingdom.
So tell us, you mentioned earlier, kind of these 12 areas of focus. Let's label those, if you don't mind. Like what
Sure.
action steps are you encouraging people to think about taking in this season?
Yeah, Dave Ramsey's been beating the drum for decades now about debt freedom. Whoever you owe owns a piece of you. Debt freedom. That's got to be, it's our number one goal. We are working as hard as we can to be debt free as soon as possible and set up our children to do the same so that we can help our friends and loved ones and impact the kingdom as strongly as we can. So that's our number one goal. I think that should be everyone's goal. And I think that should be every business's goal as well. I know that can be more of a challenge for a business. On the other hand, if you know you've got 5 to 6 years, that's doable if you're running a healthy business.
Yeah.
So I would say that'd be number one. Number two is take a look at I did all these in alliteration to help remember it. So eventually I'll have these memorized, John, but I'm going off a cheat sheet in front of me. But I all start with D so I can remember them eventually. Depression resistant income. Believe it or not, there are industries that are depression resistant because I studied it out. And there's a whole list of industries that even when a depression hits, they're still needed. They're still paid for. They're still valid businesses. What's significantly different though, John, what concerns me so much compared to 1930 is that we are so heavily in the service sector now. And a lot of the service sector is dependent heavily on discretionary spending. It's not actually tied to a physical legitimate need. So what Mike Rowe has been saying about dirty jobs, blue collar jobs, trades, skilled trades, the professions like that, that's going to be invaluable. If you have experience in that and you have a business in that space, it's invaluable because you can't outsource it. Everybody's still going to need it. It's not service related, not service industry related. It is service, but it's not service related. And in times like that, buying new is not going to be an option for so many people. Fixing and repairing what they do have will all of a sudden become number one priority. So if you are already in a skilled trade, a blue collar business, you are light years ahead of the ones that have the Ivy League white collar office job paying 6 figures with all the benefits, because that's not where the future is. The future is those things you can't outsource. AI doesn't touch it. There aren't robots that are going and doing it yet. You've got plenty of time to be so much in demand. If you've got a young person that's interested in trade, so look at those. I have a list, and the list is growing, of depression resistant income sources. So that would be number two, is to look at where does your income come from, which is why as an entrepreneurial pastor, if 100% of your income comes from the church you serve and you experience something like this, guess what happens to your tithes and offerings?
Yeah. I was just going to make that same point. It's what we've been saying at the Entre Pastors platform for years now. And that is, there's wisdom in not being 100% dependent upon your church. If something like this plays out, giving to the local church is going to absolutely take a hit. I mean, there's just no way around that. As normal, everyday people feel the weight of an economic collapse, tithes and offerings are out the window. So, Pastor, this would be a great time for you to be thinking about how can I get a business that, especially one that is depression resistant. And I believe, shameless plug for Entre Pastors, we can help you do that. We can help you launch that kind of a business. So I love that you're setting me up for a shameless plug there. Thank you. Let's keep going. What
No,
else?
yeah, domicile. So your house, where you live. That's where the bulk of people's debt is tied up. And if I could be bold enough to say this, I don't mean this to be sensational, but I mean this for people to think differently, change your paradigm a little bit. So I won't go deep into each point, but I just want to pull off like the top one for domicile. Out of Central Ohio, it's growing like crazy. They're building houses and apartments as fast as they can. Intel's building a huge chip factory on the east side of Columbus. We're exploding. It's a seller's market still and will be for quite a few years. Here's what I want people to think about. When you think of housing, if you're just thinking of the roof you sleep under and you encounter something like this, wherever people are concentrated, they're dependent even more upon outside resources. So I liken subdivisions to concentration camps. I know that sounds horrible, but let me explain what I mean by simply looking at the words concentration and camps. You're concentrated and you're encamped. You're entirely dependent upon the water that comes to you, the electricity that's piped in, getting food from the grocery store. You have no way of really sustaining yourself. And when we look at what happens in times of brief disruption about people around you that you would think are just the nicest people in the world, when the rubber hits the road and something like this comes down the pike, when you're getting to survival instead of comfort, human nature, if they're not believers, kicks in. And we know what that looks like because
Yeah.
we've seen that when there's any kind of tragedy, whether it be a natural disaster or whatever, what's happening to the stores? Is it people taking care of others? Well, that does happen. And there are those stories that are encouraging. That's not the bulk of what's going to happen. So when I say domicile, consider where you live and consider it seriously. What debt's attached to it? How much would you owe? Could you go to something that would be where you could do some things self-sufficiently where you can't in a subdivision and you'd have a little bit of elbow room? The places that will be hit the hardest are the cities and the suburbs with this. And I know you're thinking, well, John, this sounds like doomsday. Well, anytime there's a correction, there's a temporary shuffling of things.
Sure.
Didn't we get a taste of this 3 years ago with COVID? Like, didn't we experience what disruption feels like on a minor scale,
Yep.
where you were still able to get the things that you needed? But when we're talking about this, you're talking about all of these things that I'm going to go through are impacted in some way, short term or long term. So where you live is a significant thing to think about. A matter of fact, I'm going to be talking to kingdom-minded home builders and find out, not the tiny home, although that is a good emergency option. But what about what's the most cost-effective, simplest home to build? 2-bedroom, 2-bath, or 1.5 bath? What could you do? What would be the simplest home to build? What would be the total package for that in people's area, depending on cost of land and such and materials? I really want to find that out. Because if someone's living in a subdivision that's an overpriced thing because of its convenience and its location and schools and all that, and you could move to something that's built, paid for, and owned, and able to do something on your own land in the same amount of time where you could spend less and put money to other priorities as well, the ones that are serious about that would seriously look at it. The pastors that are serving congregations that are more rural, you're already at a significant advantage. And I know it doesn't seem like that, but if you realize that what those larger congregations and cities and suburbs are so entirely dependent upon, you don't have that. The more rural of a congregation you are, and if you combine that with being entrepreneurial, you're in an excellent spot. So I'd encourage you with that. Smaller congregation, a little more rural, you have some significant advantages that the others will not have.
Interesting.
Food. When the snow is said that it's going to fly in Atlanta, good luck finding milk and bread. Okay, that's a snowstorm. We saw the impact when ice, freezing rain went through Texas a few years ago, and the disruption that caused in supply chain and the damages it caused and what was wiped out and so hard to get. Well, just imagine on a scale of there's this major disruption that happens. There's going to be a premium on food, on water. Now we live out in the country, so our water is well water, but depending on what your source of water is, that's something you need to be considering as well. Medical care, how's that going to work? Do you have a diversified money supply? And this is something I'm not an expert on, and I'm going to be studying more and talking to kingdom-minded people about this, because the American dollar is already devalued significantly from just 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30. And that's only going to increase in scale as we move closer to this correction. So how you have your money, I feel most grieved, John, for retirees.
Mm-hmm.
They invest, they save, they follow the wise counsel of their financial guides, and they have this idea of this is what retirement's going to look like. But, and I don't mean this to be harsh. I just mean this to be as loving as I can. If your hope for the future is tied to anything, whether it be the value of your home or especially the stock market, that's not going to be a good plan, given what we see historically and what's being forecasted. So I don't want this to be a panic thing. I would find people that would look at this reasonably. If your financial advisor just blows this off, I would be highly concerned whether they are seriously concerned about your well-being or whether they're more concerned about their income. Yeah, if you share this with them and they blow it off saying, "Oh, that's not going to happen," then I would evaluate who you have as an advisor.
Yeah.
They're going to have some ideas for you. How can you diversify? And there are ways to do it so that your money is protected and still has some tax shelters available to it. There are a good number of ways to do it, but I'm not the expert on it, so I won't speak on that. But I will say, when it gets to a situation like I believe is coming, the way you diversify your money, we'll say, barter becomes an absolutely invaluable thing. And if we have this mini ecosystem set up within believers, amongst believers, and I have ideas for this, a lot of these things that people need, we can address them as local congregations and as a more of a national type informal network, that there can be ways to address these concerns.
Oh.
If you have believers who are doctors, if you have believers who are dentists, we have all of these. If you have people that love to garden, they've got a green thumb. You've got people that have spring water access, if they're more rural like that. You have people that are able to heat their home, whatever resource that is. I don't think that the grid is a concern. I think it's going to run because they could not afford to be at that kind of collapse. How your electricity bill is going to be paid for, I don't know, but it's not like that's going to be shut off. But still be concerned about, depending on what disruption happens because of people, that's where you really got to kind of think ahead about worst case and prepare for that. And then if it's not so bad, you're more than prepared.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bit of reasonability that goes into that. Driving, so your vehicle, transportation, fuel source. I wasn't alive at the time, but the oil crisis back in the 70s, where cars were lined up around the block to get their tank of gas filled, and you had to pay quite a bit for it. I'm envisioning that there's something like that. So I've got ideas for all of these, and I'd say one more. We already talked about churches. That's the 12th one, but the 11th one that's on my list is schools, Christian schools, private schools. I've got some ideas on how to address that so that people can still, if they're not able to, single moms, families that are two income, but they don't want their children in public school for obvious reasons. They really want them to be in a positive environment that supports their beliefs and how they raise their children. Christian schools are going to get hit hard as well because those are funded primarily by discretionary spending. So I've got some ideas on how to address that. So I buzzed through those 12 pretty quick, but I've got plenty of ideas on and some things already built out on these topics. But I also know that within an entrepreneurial minded congregation, there's all kinds of ideas out there. I don't have to be the one to come up with everything.
Yeah.
I think you start with the most important, and then you start figuring out you've got your short term and you've got your long term, and then how do I prepare for both?
Yeah.
So those are kind of the reviews.
So what would you want to see happen as a result of this? As we get ready to sort of wind things down, I'm going to ultimately, offer you up to anybody that would want to reach out and connect and have a deeper conversation. But, what would be a big win for you to see if this message were to hit home with some pastors and have them lean in and go, maybe there's something here. Maybe we need to be thinking and doing some things. What would that look like for you? Describe kind of a win, if you would.
Yeah. So, unlike Y2K, where the sky is falling and I want to make tons of money before it doesn't fall, there's two very different reasons. This was given to me by the Lord, so I don't claim that my brilliance. I was given this, and I feel that it's my responsibility to do something with it, like a steward. I've been entrusted with this. So what I want to do is I want to schedule Zoom calls, do a virtual conversation with ones where like this really resonates. Tell me a little bit more. What are you thinking? What ideas do you have? This is where I'm at. What are some suggestions you have? Because we're in the same boat together. It's not like I've got it all figured out. I'm still working as hard as I know how without abandoning my family and having a life too of knocking out debt and then preparing as best I can, helping others to do the same. So let's have a Zoom chat. Reach out to me through my LinkedIn, John D. Hanson. You can hit my website. That's got my email there. I'm sure we'll provide my email at this. So it's my first name and then at the number 7waysmenu.com. You can send me an email that way. But either way, let's have a virtual conversation if you're open to that. And then you say, well, this really resonates. I really need to share this with at least leadership, or if the whole church would benefit from it. Then what I love to do, I've been doing public speaking since I was 16 years old. I would love to come and share with your congregation if you're open to that after those initial conversations with you and your leadership team. And all I ask for is cover the cost of my travel. Just help me get out there and back home. And I would be happy to come out and do that. If virtual makes sense, we can do that too. I've done more virtual presentations because of COVID than in person, but I've done both. So the value is, and the reason I would recommend the second one, you're like, why does it matter, John? I can just take this and share it with them. Okay. For an idea that could be as startling as this, it could be helpful to have the guy that's not a nut come and talk to them, as opposed to you trying to explain this to them, because there is that familiarity hurdle. So we experienced this. Our sons, like a lot of sons do, like clean your room, clean your room. It's a constant reminder, we'll say. Yeah. But then they started working with this basketball coach, where his mantra was "do it now." He said it like 100 times in practice. Do it now, do it now, do it now. And they thought it was funny. But then you know what? When they came home after working with this coach and we said, you need to clean your room, guess what they said to each other? They were going to do it now. What, are we chopped liver or something? Or that it wasn't that. It was that they needed another voice they respect, saying the same thing, reinforcing what we had been saying, so that they would even have that take action. And that's what I'm offering for those entrepreneurial pastors and business leaders and church leaders that are like, this resonates with me. But it would really help if somebody else shared this and then I could support them. That's what I would love to do, because I think that's going to have more impact. I think it's going to be better received. And then number one, and number three, it saves you from being the nut wearing the tinfoil hat that the sky is falling. Even though you could present all of these facts just like I did, it's going to be most likely better received from somebody they don't know. And I just see that in business coaching. You've probably experienced this too, John, where the business owner can say something till they're blue in the face, but some expert comes in and all of a sudden the company just does what they say. And the owner's like, right. I've been saying this it's that hurdle of familiarity that is just human behavior that we see. Jesus' family, they're like, we knew the guy. Like, Jesus, he's the Son of God. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, John, I'll tell you, man, I believe in what you're doing. And I may look back on this and go, man, I was so crazy believing in this guy and what he had to say. But I genuinely, when you and I first connected, I was like, I want to help this guy get this message out to the churches, because in some ways there's some intersect to where, the work that I'm doing with Entre Pastors. And I think you're looking a little bit further down the road and at a bigger picture, but I don't think it's off base. And I think the worst thing probably that our listeners could do to this today would be to just dismiss it out of hand and not really meditate on this a little bit and think on this and just go, man, Lord, is there something here that I need to be thinking about, both for my family personally and then for my church family that I have the privilege and responsibility of leading? Because I love the way you're framing this. yeah, on the first blush, it could look like doomsday, the sky is falling. But if we, as Jesus people, as kingdom-minded people, look at this, it could be one of the greatest hours of the church if those who know and love Jesus, who has promised that he will never leave us or forsake us, he's promised to provide all of our needs. And by the way, part of that provision comes through the sound mind he's given us and the skills and talents he's given us. So we have time to prepare. He did it with Joseph, like you're saying, the Joseph Project. Why would that not be a thing to repeat itself thousands of years later in human history, where God is saying, get prepared. There's a storm coming. I'm going to be with you through the storm, and we're going to build back stronger than ever, maybe, So I'm with you, man. Like, sign me up. I'll take the journey with you, and let's get this word out to as many people as we can. So anything else you want to say? If you had a few minutes just for a parting shot, what would you say to encourage pastors today?
Yeah, I would say this. I'm glad you asked for that, because something just flashed into my mind as you were sharing, John, is this. I believe there's going to be a significant falling away from the faith because the churches with the big numbers and lots of followers and lots of people, this happening, and I believe strongly that it will, if it does happen and nothing was said, and we know what happened in the 1930s, magnify that times a whole bunch more in the 2030s, the level of mental health, of hopelessness, suicide, of shattered dreams. And our church pastor, who said they knew God, didn't tell us a thing about this.
Hmm.
The devil, I'm empathetic. I was born that way, and it just hits me in the gut to think of the people and what they're going to project on our Heavenly Father because of people in leadership not saying a word. And that's just not something that I could bear. I don't mean that as a guilt trip. I mean it as we are seriously talking about people's lives and their livelihoods. It behooves you as a leader who truly cares for the people you serve to at least take a look at it. Take a look at ITR's website. If you want to get a little bit more about me before you reach out to me, hit my website, johndhanson.com. You can find all about me there. My social media, I'm very active on LinkedIn and Facebook. You can learn who I'm connected with and what I believe and get an idea of my values there before you ever reach out. But don't try and do this alone. It doesn't have to be with me. If you've got other people who are entrepreneurially minded where they get it too, and you start DIYing this, doing it yourself with the people you've got in your circle, by all means. But don't be that pastor that in 2030, your congregation says, why didn't we do something about this? Because here's the big thing that I didn't touch on, because I don't want to be a doomsdayer and use fear as a tactic. But whoever you owe at that time, when there is that correction, they own you. You won't have options. If you want to stay in the house you live in, if you want to send your kids to school, if you want to have a job, it's going to be their way or not at all. You won't have options at that point. And I don't want to see believers. We saw what this was like, no matter what your opinions are health-wise. When choice was removed for you and your family, it didn't feel good.
Yep.
Well, I say multiply that times 100. You need to have some options in front of you. And that's why I would recommend taking this quite seriously.
Yeah. Well, John, it's been a pleasure getting to hang out with you and have this conversation, man. It sure makes me think, and I pray that God uses it to wake some people up and get some people prepared for being that lighthouse of the gospel in a season where the world is going to absolutely need hope and truth and
Yes.
love, that we would be
Yeah.
prepared to be those people that are not held back by, limitations that could have been avoided if we would have heeded the warning and taken action on it. So thank you for hanging out with us today, man. It's been fun, and look forward to talking to you in the near future.
Yeah. It's not doom and gloom, guys. You could absolutely be the hero to all these people, your congregation and the ones around you. So on the flip side of it, on the positive side, you've got all kinds of opportunity to be the hero that God has placed you to be as a position of influence over people that respect you, love you, and care for you. So absolutely. I'm not a doom and gloom guy. I love to serve and help people, very positive minded. Let's kick this thing together and win things for the kingdom of God.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Entre Pastors Podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the Entre Pastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our Entre Pastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own Entre Pastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at entrepastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.